Hello, critics, non-critics, and friends. Welcome to the Film Optix podcast, where we take a glance into blockbusters, indie films, and everything in between. I'm your host, Christian, and as always, I'm joined by my good friend / my co-host, Devin. And today, we're going to be sharing our views and insights on the 8th episode, the penultimate episode of HBO's original series, The Last of Us, which is based on a video game of the same name. And episode 8 is titled When We Are in Need. And before we begin today's episode, you can listen to our podcast on podcast platforms around the internet. That includes Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google Podcasts, and more. And if you are a new or seasoned listener to the show, we would love to hear from you guys. Follow us on Instagram and follow us on Twitter at Film Optix. That is Optix with an X. Or you can email us at filmoptix@gmail.com for any movie-related questions. Mr. Devin, we're actually recording right after The Last of Us episode 8 premiered on HBO Max. We usually do these on Mondays, but, you know, it's a busy week. Devin's got to go watch some Scream on Monday, so we figured we kind of just, do a shorter episode for you guys this week, just me and Devin. Unfortunately, Mike was not able to join us this week, but I believe he will be back for the finale. Fingers crossed. But, Devin, how's your weekend been? What have you been up to?
Yeah, it's so weird doing this, so fresh. It's never been this brand new before. We usually get a nice little day or so to let it all sink in and watch some videos and join in on the discourse. But yeah, it's good to be here on the weekend. It was a pretty solid weekend for me.
You sound so tired.
just that Sunday feeling, the Sunday scaries.
Yeah, Sunday scaries for sure. But yeah, you are right. We're usually able to, we've done our homework, as in we've already played the games, but, we usually, watch a little bit of heavy spoilers, listen to the Last of Us official HBO podcast, kind of like get a few insights.
I like the side-by-sides that Heavy Spoilers does.
Yeah, for sure. I know a lot of other outlets have been doing the same, but yeah, it's nice to show people who've never played the games, the cutscenes of the show. But if you haven't played the games and you have a PlayStation, I 100% think you should play these games because, you get the same story in a different light. It's like reading a book and then watching the movie, or watching the movie first and then reading the book. You watch the movie, you enjoy the characters, you love the adventure and, the message that the story brings. And then you get to go back and re-experience it again, but in a different medium with more depth and more, just more nuance to everything that's going on. But yeah, I think it's pretty awesome. If you have a PlayStation, definitely play The Last of Us Part 1 and Part 2 when you can. But as I mentioned before, we're going to be getting into our Episode 8 review of The Last of Us. Again, that is titled When We Are in Need. Today, we're just going to be giving our initial reactions of the episode and then a little bit of spoilers. No trivia this week, unfortunately, because there wasn't a lot of trivia on IMDb. There was one thing. It said that, did you know that Troy Baker played Joel in the Last of Us video game and mocapped him as well? That was literally the only thing. I'm like, wow, IMDb is really slacking this week. But after we get into the spoiler section, we'll get into our final thoughts and ratings. And then we will close out with our coming up next. And then we'll say our final goodbyes. So with all that said, we'll be right back after this introduction to The Last of Us Episode 8. And we are back with our The Last of Us episode 8 review. This is the penultimate episode, so there's only one more episode left to close out the series. 9 episodes total. I thought it was going to be 10 episodes when the series first started, but then I heard it was 9. I was like, oh, okay. You know, I feel like that's fine. I feel like a lot of studios aren't as pressured to be like, okay, you know, we need a solid 10 episodes, because so far they've been telling the story in a perfect manner, or near to perfect manner altogether. But I'm going to pass it over to Devin so he can give his initial reactions to The Last of Us episode 8.
Wow, yeah, what an episode. Like I said before, it's just so crazy. Like, for it to be so fresh. We just, literally for me 5 minutes ago, just finished it. And I'm just kind of in awe that they were able to pull off what they did all in one episode. Like, this part of the game specifically is such a integral part of the game. One of the most memorable parts, especially the log cabin at the end there. And just the whole David plotline in the game is just one of those moments in gaming that you will always remember, just because of how crazy and how just off the walls and pivotal it is to the story. And they were able to pull it off in, what was it? It was like 46 minutes or 48 minutes, somewhere around there.
Yeah, I think, the full episode, it was like clocking like around like an hour. So if you take off the credits, yeah, I'd say around maybe 45, maybe 50. I'd say around maybe 50 minutes.
Yeah, I'm really curious to see like a side-by-side, like I mentioned before with heavy spoilers, how he does the side-by-side scenes for this one, because it felt like it was pretty accurate, pretty similar to what the game had. But I think maybe this one may have had a few more extra lines in there that kind of added some more punch to it. I'm sure we'll find those when people point them out, but it's just so crazy seeing Troy Baker played this character. Like, the irony is just off the charts, where Troy Baker's sitting there trying to kill Ellie at all costs. It's just, when you think about his history as playing Joel for however many years, like, I wonder if that must have been hard for him to even like try to act, because he loves Ellie. I don't care if Joel's a fictional character. He must have some love deep down in his heart for her, but he had to try to hunt her down this episode, which was definitely interesting to see. Don't really have much else for initial thoughts, but I'm glad they were able to pull this off, because it's, like I said, it's a very pivotal moment in the game.
I do agree with you there for sure. Like you said, this is a pivotal moment, and it's for someone. And Devin's played part 1. I hasn't played part 2 yet. We're still waiting for that to hit PC altogether. But for someone who has played this game multiple times and will be buying it again on PC, I could say, you know, obviously, as we've been saying throughout this coverage of the series, that, you know, it is the story, and when they're able to expand on certain characters and give them more depth, then they will. And we saw that with David, with him being this father figure of the head of this religious group. Not necessarily a cult. Well, kind of, sort of, really, but more just like a nut house altogether. But, you know, he's one of those, you know, religious preachers that, you know, his head isn't tied on, you know, all the way. It's not screwed on just, you know, just right. Doesn't necessarily have the tried and true intentions that a ideal preacher would have when it comes to this episode. But yeah, like Devin said, they somehow were able to add or cover a good part of the game where Joel is still immobilized, because, you know, the man was literally stabbed. He's older. He doesn't move as fast as he used to. He doesn't dodge at all, not even in the video games. This man just doesn't dodge. But, you know, it felt like a natural progression off of last week, because I saw a lot of people, and I'm sure you did too, Devin, people online saying, oh, you know, last week was filler, and, you know, that doesn't add anything to the story. And it's like, well, when it comes to post-apocalyptic storytelling, you kind of have to do, flashbacks to understand where the characters came from and how they got to where they are today. That's like storytelling 101. But hey, that's just, I don't know what's wrong with people. But overall, I thought this was a fantastic episode, a very violent episode. And we get to see how much Joel means to Ellie. We know this obviously from playing the games, but for people who haven't, this was a violent Ellie episode. This was, Ellie in survival mode and doing anything that she can to get back to Joel, to, nurse him back to health. And like you say, Troy Baker makes an appearance in this episode as one of David's men. And I think David is one of those characters within the game and within the show where it's pretty synonymous. But of course, we get a little bit more of the backstory of, hey, this person died during the very beginning of the episode. And we find out that Joel's the one who killed him. And naturally, people in this world want revenge, but it was a great episode. I could go on.
Actually,
and on,
I missed that part. Who was the one that died or got killed? Was it someone we saw before, or was it just a random person that's in that colony?
I believe it was a random person, because even in the video game, you don't know who it is, because they mention that, this guy's been, going around killing a lot of our men and he's traveling with this girl. I think it's just a random person within their group. I don't believe we actually met that person altogether. But yeah, I'm like 99% sure. But if anyone out there caught something that we didn't, let us know at Film Optix on Twitter, to tweet at us and be like, hey, this actually happened. But I'm sure if there is something that we missed, we'll definitely, I'm sure heavy spoilers, we'll definitely get on it, because he's been doing a great job covering that over on his channel, him and Jared for sure, and even with the Last of Us podcast. But yeah, I'm pretty sure it was just some random person. But it would be cool if it was someone that we just like randomly met for like maybe like a minute or two. But I don't know. I feel like them just mentioning a person versus us knowing who it actually is would make more sense. But
I'm also very curious to see, I'm sure someone will do it, but to see like the time difference between this portion of the game and what the episode was like, because it felt like in the game it was a longer portion. That might have been because obviously you take breaks when you're playing a game, you can save it and play later. That's probably what I did, but and also because it was so intense, maybe they made it feel longer. But I wanted to know what the difference is between the times it took for the David plot line between the game and the show.
Yeah, and I think we actually mentioned this with last week, where Mike was saying how it feels longer to us, because to your point, I do agree, but it also feels longer to us because there is no gameplay happening. So when this portion of the game does happen, we do get to play as Ellie for the first time. And I remember that feeling. I was like, oh my gosh, this is so cool. She's so light, she's running around. When you first meet David, there's infected like all over. You have a few infected action sequences that you fend off, some infected with David. And then it seems a little bit slower because, you are kind of cutting back and forth. There's a few more cutscenes within this portion of the game, but there is a lot of gameplay as well. And I feel like in the game, there's like a big blizzard. So everything that's happening, you're kind of trying to figure out where you are, and, you're sneaking around, either trying to sneak past people or kill them. So I feel as if the gameplay really made it feel a little bit longer, alongside with, I've been playing Hogwarts Legacy. So it's like, I really haven't been able to pick it up since like last weekend. I've been playing a lot today, but I had to kind of like get back into the groove of things. So like, man, I kind of forgot where I left off. But to your point, I do agree. I think it's a combination of both, for sure. But yeah, with everything that happens, in this episode. It's crazy, but I feel like we should get into spoilers before we, we kind of just go off a rocker here. But ladies and gentlemen, we're about to head into our spoiler section for episode 8 of The Last of Us. So that is your first spoiler warning for episode 8 of The Last of Us. Again, that is your second spoiler warning for episode 8 of The Last of Us. So if you haven't seen it, definitely go watch it. Literally, like we said, we literally just got done watching this episode because, it's going to be a busy week for both of us all together. We got we got to go visit New York City and, track down Ghostface. But now that we're in our spoiler section, we can kind of talk about more about David. As we mentioned, they kind of added more of a backstory for him, saying that he was elected to be like the preacher of his commune. And we find out that his people have been struggling and they've been resorting to eating their own dead. So yes, David is cannibal alongside Mr. Troy Baker's character. I forgot his name. Do you remember his name? I know we just watched the episode, so it's kind of embarrassing. James. What did you think of his performance, Troy Baker's performance in this episode?
Yeah, like I said before, I think he did a good job considering the circumstances. Like, I'm sure deep down inside, it was painful for him to shoot at Ellie and threaten Ellie. Like, it's just so against his nature as the original Joel.
That is very true. It was crazy because, we knew he was going to show up in this series, right? We didn't know when. I did a little bit of digging after they kind of announced that Troy Baker and Ashley Johnson will be a part of the series. We have not seen Ashley yet. I do know who she's playing, but I don't want to say it just to, avoid spoilers there. But having Troy Baker, I thought he was going to be David, like to begin with. Like when they first announced it, I was like, oh my gosh, it'd be really awesome if Troy Baker was David, because David is essentially a foil of Joel. These are two men that have done bad things. Joel is no saint, and I think we need to lay that down and let people understand that Joel and Ellie are the protagonists. Mainly it's Ellie is the protagonist. She really is the main character of the story, but Joel is not a tried and true. He's not Ned Stark, so to speak, for all you Game of Thrones fans out there. He's not he's a great character altogether. And not saying that Joel is has resorted to cannibalism before. I'm pretty sure he hasn't, but there are a lot of similarities between Joel and David that, you kind of see, especially more so in the games, but, trying to do whatever they can to protect their own. They're both smart, both, middle-aged, but they understand how to survive in this world. And they've both come a very long way. And, I could sit here talking about it all day, but I really, to get back to my point, I thought it would have been awesome that Troy Baker was David, but the guy who plays David, I think, did a fantastic job. Very creepy, very eerie. He has this trusting-esque nature about him, but, Ellie sees right through him. And it kind of just goes haywire from there.
Yeah, I think it was very smart of him to cast a ginger to play David because the soulless nature of the character.
Oh my gosh, Devin and gingers, here we go.
Apparently, I was looking at his filmography because he did look familiar. He was John Gray in Dark Phoenix, so he's good at playing the bad, awful, creepy guy.
You get a sense of David in the games where he is just very, his true nature comes out. But this David in the show, we do get the, malicious, deadly version of David, but it's more reserved almost.
Before it just turns into full on creepy. Like,
Yeah, yeah,
there's that moment where it switches, where you're like, okay, maybe he is a bit trustworthy, but then it's just like,
right.
no.
Yeah, it's like he can turn it off and on like a light switch altogether. And David mentions that, he has a violent heart and he tries to essentially turn Ellie when she gets captured. That scene kind of plays out pretty much like the game, but the violent heart line and David trying to more so turn Ellie to their side, that's new. But I like that because Ellie does have a violent heart. Like I said, she went into full survival mode in this
Well, I
episode.
think he was going for a bit more than just bringing her on his side based on that hand touch there. That was the line being crossed.
Yeah. And later on, when they're in the cabin on fire, I'm trying to remember. Ellie does break his finger in the game, but it plays out a little bit differently.
I was trying to remember if the specific line was also in the game where he mentioned that he likes the biting part, because that's very creepy.
I don't think so. I could be wrong.
In the show, Ellie's biting him to try to get him off of her, and he goes, "You don't understand. Biting's one of my favorite parts." Like, oh boy, that's just disgusting.
Yeah, it very well could be in the game, but if memory serves me right, I don't think it was, because in the game, it's more so that, David, like the big reveal is that, David is a cannibal. He wants to, eat Ellie, or, eventually when it comes down to that. But yeah, in the show, it is more, a little bit more different. He has a different agenda altogether, or tries to. But yeah, it's more, I wouldn't say realistic in the show. It's just different because, like I said, it's the corrupt preacher all over again. Unfortunately, we've heard those type of stories happen in real life when preachers don't necessarily aren't doing what they're supposed to be doing. So yeah, that was definitely a another motive there for sure. But I wanted to pass it back over to Devin while we're in our spoiler section. Is there anything else you want to mention before we get to our final thoughts for this episode and before we close out?
Yeah, it kind of felt nostalgic watching the ending here, because I feel like the cage slash, I guess it was I guess it was a kitchen in the cabin. The cage slash kitchen escape, like that's one of the parts of the game that just stayed in my memory the brightest, just because it's so memorable. And then the log cabin itself, where you're sneaking around and David's chasing after you, like those two moments are like the ones that stand out the most in my memory when I think about the game, because they're the most intense and then the most kind of rewarding, I guess, because of the end that you get where Ellie just loses it and David is no more. I am kind of going back and forth, deciding if getting more of David would have been beneficial, like more than just this one episode, to kind of build up to this moment. Maybe it would have been a better payoff, but I'm not sure. That's why I kind of want to know how long it took in the actual game.
Yeah. So when you say take in the actual game, you mean the time frame between where Ellie first meets David and between the cabin scene?
Yeah, pretty much. Because I mean, in this episode, we get that first, what is it, like 5 minutes where Ellie's like hunting and trying to get the deer, and then she runs into David. So
right. I want to guess. I think it's between like maybe 2 to 3 days tops, because she meets David and then she goes back. She goes back after exchanging for the medicine. He takes care of Joel, and then that turns into the next day, because David said that, we'll wait till the next day, follow her, and then do all of that. I'm trying to figure out, after 1 day has passed, after she gets captured, how long was she captured for? I'm assuming it was maybe like 2-3 days tops. that's what it seems, but I'm not sure. Maybe the official podcast will clarify that altogether. But I think you're onto something when it comes to David, because obviously, it feels like we do technically spend more time with David in the game than we do in the show, because it takes longer to beat a video game than it does to watch a TV show. But I wonder what else they could have done, because obviously David is really the big bad, the biggest bad, I guess you could say, of them crossing through. And also the winter section of the video game, much like you had said, Devin, that, it sticks out in your brain. It's also my favorite section of the entire game for sure. Probably just because, you get to play as Ellie, you get to, you get to view the world through her eyes. You feel even more connected to Ellie by playing as her. And when it comes to that section of the game, it's so interesting. Just the conversation that David and Ellie have just all together, like you said, David comes off as like a really nice guy, but he's very unhinged. But hey, Joel's unhinged too, because we finally get to see a little bit more of a violent Joel this episode as well.
Yeah, I was just gonna mention that it's so good. It's so good to see pissed off Joel. Like it's rare. He's usually very calm and relaxed and stern, but we definitely get the pissed off version here in that house they were hiding in. I think that I felt like that was word for word from the game, because I think I remember those lines where he was just says, "I believe him."
Mm-hmm. Yeah. When he's trying to figure out where the cabin is, and he said that part. Ooh, in the game every single time, even like watching it again, I was like, it was so violent when Joel just digs that knife straight on in. It was like Ghostface all over again, and he's like, oh, he's like, you better answer me before I pop your kneecap off. I was like, oh man, I didn't even think about that. But yeah, that scene is like ripped straight from the game, especially when Ellie is in the cage as well. And pretty much everything outside of, well, I mean, Ellie, she kind of just goes on a killing spree, ends up killing Troy Baker's character, which I think is very funny.
The irony is just so ripe all over the place.
She took that cleaver, man, and just, she gutted that man. I was like, that looks so awesome.
That's actually the other trivia that IMDb has for this episode. In the show, it's a cleaver, but in the game, it was a machete.
Yeah, it was a machete, that's right. But yeah, overall, I mean, they were able to kind of just put this all together. Like, for, again, this is for TV. I know we've been talking about a lot of the comparisons, but like we've said before, or like Troy Baker has said, this it's not much of an adaptation. It's supposed to be more of an evolution. I would view it more as like an amazing companion piece to the video game. But let's get into our final thoughts here of this episode. I know we could be talking about it here forever, but we're a little tired altogether. If you haven't noticed, but it is okay. Devin, what are your final thoughts on The Last of Us Episode 8?
Yeah, I'm going to just have to give this one a job well done, just like the whole rest of the series so far. Really, there hasn't been a miss. I mean, I know some people were down in the last episode, but I think it definitely has its place, and kind of gives us some more Ellie backstory, which is always welcomed. And like we mentioned, it's impressive that they were able to portray this part of the game within this short-ish amount of time. It was like a 50-ish minute episode, and they were able to get everything done. It's just crazy to think that we didn't know David before today, but after this episode, we know him, and he is dead and gone after 76 stabs, is what I'm guessing. Just based on maybe someone will do a kill count, instant replay.
Yeah, well, she's repeatedly hitting him with a cleaver over and over. And in the video game, it's more so Joel finds her in the cabin and like stops her from like, you know, just going off. And then you get the whole, you know, baby girl scene, which of course they finally have an understanding of each other. This is, you know, their way of expressing their feelings to each other, of saying, you know, how much Joel and Ellie care for each other. But much like Devin, you know, for my final thoughts, it's, you know, it's another great episode. Like every single episode, I've loved every single episode, like so far. It has been very, very consistent. And I hope we get more video game adaptations, like true adaptations down the line where, you know, you're able to bring on like the game director of that series and work with them, because I know we're supposed to be getting a lot more PlayStation TV content. So I don't know what the heck happened with Uncharted. Like I said before, I think that easily should have been a TV show. Even if it was a movie, it's all it is supposed to be Indiana Jones, and I don't know how they messed that up, but they messed it up. Overall, I digress. For episode 8, it was fantastic. I love, you know, we got to see more of just Bella Ramsey just killing it on screen, and you know, like she her first job ever was in Game of Thrones. It's like it's amazing how we're able to, you know, see where she came from. She's done a few movies in between there as well. Definitely watch Catherine Call Birdie for sure, if anyone hasn't watched this on Amazon Prime. But yeah, just another like Ellie alone episode. You know, and this, it's perfectly titled When We Are in Need, and that can go so many different ways altogether. But job well done for this episode. Season finale next week, and it's on with some Ted Lasso and Mandalorian, of course. But
yeah, I forgot to mention I've been catching up on season 2 of Ted Lasso, almost there, just in time.
I love it so much, man. It's I wish they would just give us.
I just watched that Coach Beard solo episode. That was interesting, to say the least.
Yeah. Oh yeah, for sure. Yeah. That's definitely a very interesting episode.
It reminded me of the Fly episode of Breaking Bad.
Yeah. Did you get to the Christmas episode yet?
Yeah, I think it might have been the last one I watched. That was really good.
Oh, warms my heart every time, man. I absolutely love it. But with all that said, that is a wrap on today's episode. And if you like what you heard on today's episode, please subscribe to our podcast on your favorite podcast platform of choice. And make sure to follow us on Twitter and Instagram at Film Optix. That is Optix with an X to stay in the know. And always share an episode of our podcast with a friend, whether it be your mother, your brother, or your significant other. Make sure to share an episode of the Film Optix podcast with a movie lover in need. And really quick, let's take a sneak peek at what's coming up next on the show. So we have our episode 9 review of The Last of Us that will be coming out next week for all you guys, the season finale. We're also going to be covering Scream 6. Very excited to talk about this. I actually might have to see this again after we cover it, because man, oh man. If you want to check out my initial reactions of that, you can find that on our Twitter page and on our Instagram page as well at Film Optix. Again, that's Optix with an X. We both saw Creed 3 over the weekend. I'm not sure if we're going to cover it or not. Not saying that we shouldn't. It's just between this and then Scream, everything else, we might be able to squeeze it in. Definitely just keep a lookout on Twitter altogether. And yeah, for what's you can listen to now, you can listen to our The Mandalorian Season 3 Episode 1 review, as well as our Cocaine Bear review as well, and our episodes 1 through 7 review of The Last of Us. And again, thank you all for listening. And remember, if you enjoy the show, kindly leave us a 5-star rating and review on iTunes and Spotify, and follow us on Twitter and Instagram to stay in the know. That was Devin signing off. My name is Christian, and we'll see you guys in the next one.
Peace.